Friends, good evening, and if you'll allow me to be amongst the first to wish you a Chag Sameach. Welcome to Temple Beth Ami. I'm Jack Luxemburg. It's my privilege to serve this congregation as its senior rabbi. And on behalf of my colleagues, Rabbi Weiss and Cantor Eschler, our Temple President, Tom Temin, our Board of Directors, our officers, and the members of our congregation, we're very happy to welcome this session of the Institute for Science and Judaism and to welcome our distinguished guests, Dr. David Rees and Dr. Stephen Sumi. Our president, my colleague, teacher, and friend, Rabbi Driesen, has given me the privilege of saying a few introductory words. Scientific advances have posed new problems for Jewish law and ethics. Organ transplants and artificial insemination are obvious examples. But no serious Jewish thinker has expressed the view that because of the problems to which it gives rise, the advance of science should be halted. These are not my words. These are not the words of an academic unconnected with the Jewish community, but rather these are the words of Dr. Moshe Tendler. Moshe Tendler is the Rosh Yeshiva at the Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary in New York. That is the rabbinic seminary of modern orthodoxy in America, and himself a professor of biology at Yeshiva University. And Rabbi Tendler, writing in the very prestigious journal Torah Umada, literally Torah and Science, makes this observation based on the assertion that Torah and science are more than compatible, but they share three very important axioms. And I hope I bring these to your attention because I think they are informative as we embark on our conversation this evening. The first axiom is that both Torah and science assert that there is order in nature. For if there is no order nor causality, then the human mind is stalled. Natural occurrences are then believed to be the whim of a god, who may be motivated by vengeance against another god, as we read in Greek mythology. Disorder and chaos are the consequences of arbitrariness associated with God's actions, and it also negates individual responsibility, since personal action is futile in a chaotic world, with only a godly whim and without a rational causality. The second axiom that Rabbi Tendler identifies is faith in the capacity to reason. The second axiom that science and Torah share is that the human mind can perceive order in nature. Faith in a God who is rational and omniscient led to faith in reason. It is the trust that our God constructed this universe in a harmony that excludes arbitrariness. God fashioned us with the spark of divine intelligence that gives us the ability to perceive this order in nature. And the third axiom that Rabbi Tendler believes that both science and the endeavor of our Judaism share is an obligation to be observant, not only in the ritual sense, but the sense of being thoughtful and keen observers of the world. The third axiom he writes that Torah and science share is that both science and Torah require an active interest in the simple occurrences of life. It is halachically demanded that we be curious about God's nature. We must be observant Jews, observing the world, and that is also the basic of all scientific development, a curiosity and a confidence that one's curiosity can lead to discovery. Torah and science coexist in the world that God created. They relate to each other in an intimate, unified relationship of a blueprint and a structure built when the blueprint is accurately followed. The imagery that the sages tried to share with us is that of the Torah as the blueprint for the world around us, and we are commanded, it is indeed a mitzvah, to interact with this world. While this is, of course, the voice of a highly intellectualized modern Orthodox point of view, let me share with you, from my own point of view, three more elements that make it possible for us to engage in a genuine dialogue between science and our Judaism, avoiding, I think, what Stephen Jay Gould described the relationship to science and religion as non-overlapping magisteria, two endeavors to explore truth in the world which somehow are unconnected. Those of us particularly think in the liberal Jewish community sometimes overlook that even amongst our Orthodox co-religionists, Torah is almost never read simply literally. It is thought to, the Pirkei Avot we read, roll it over again and again, all is to be found there. Within the finite words are infinite meanings, including meanings that can be pointing to the truths taught to us by science as well as by faith. In our tradition, secondly, questioning is not only acceptable, it's encouraged. There is a phrase that recurs in all rabbinic literature. An assertion is made by our sages, and the first one to raise his hand asks the question, how do we know this? The rabbis have always had to explain their reasoning. And if there was a choice between believing something because of a divine miracle or believing something because of thoughtful and reasoned arguments, there is no question which the rabbis would accept. Reason and logic always carries the day. And finally, something that I know is frustrating for some of us who are students of our tradition, but I think is part of its genius, is that we come out of a religious tradition that has no fixed doctrinal theology. There's a great Yiddish saying that says, if I knew God, I would be God. In fact, I think that claiming that you know God's will is an act of incredible hubris, especially in the eyes of a tradition that's a little bit more spiritually humble. Instead, what we say about God is much more what we say about us than about God. And there are, in fact, a whole range of different theologies within our Judaism. And that range of theologies gives us a broad, expansive, inclusive understanding of the relationship between God and this world that more than makes room for scientific truth that informs and strengthens our faith. We are privileged then, in the spirit of that wonderful dialogue to which I believe we as Jews are heir, to participate in this evening's program and to introduce it, again, my colleague and my teacher, Rabbi George Driesen.
I'm delighted to see you here, each and every one of you. This evening's forum features two eminent scientists, Yale professor Dr. David Rees, a renowned leader in large-scale studies that have uncovered precise relationships between genes and behavior, and NIH's Dr. Stephen Sumi, one of the world's outstanding primatologists who has for decades studied how genes and child-rearing practices affect the behavior of rhesus monkeys. And if you're lucky and the AV system works, you're in for a delightful treat as you learn something about the work that Dr. Sumi has been doing. Together, they will describe the worldwide multidisciplinary studies that they are initiating to discover how adversity in fetal development and early childhood gives rise to profound medical illness in adult life. Armed with that knowledge, scientists hope to devise interventions to stop those illnesses from occurring or reduce their severity. I now want to explain to you why I think that effort, that enterprise, may properly be characterized as an attempt at tikkun olam. And let me acknowledge, before I say one word on that subject, my debt to my teacher and friend Norman Shore and Rabbi Dr. Jill Jacobs, on whose research I have relied. The root of tikkun in the phrase tikkun olam is tav kuf nun. It may be best translated as to fix, or perhaps to establish. And the meaning of tikkun olam depends upon the context. And I want to discuss very briefly, because you came here for the science, not for Driesen, 4 authoritative sources in which the phrase Tikkun Olam appears. In the Mishnah, the first compendium of Jewish law that dates from around 200 CE. Sorry, guys, I can't memorize talks anymore. Oh, dear. Second, in the ancient prayer Aleinu, which we now recite whenever we pray. Third, in a few midrashim, rabbinic expansions of the biblical text. And fourth, in the 16th century mystical writings of Isaac Luria, the great Safed Kabbalist. And as you will see, these sources support the application of the classic phrase to the endeavor our panelists will discuss. In several cases recorded in the Mishnah, the Chachamim, the sages, invoke the phrase Tikkun Olam to justify certain fixes they enacted to modify the corpus of Jewish law. One group of such cases involved the harm that ensued when a man who was no longer living with his wife divorced her by sending her a get, a writ of divorce, in accordance with the Torah, and then changed his mind. So he went to a Beit Din, a rabbinic court, to have the get annulled. If the wife, not knowing of the annulment, married another man in reliance upon the divorce document that she got, and they conceived a child or children, the child would be, and the children would be, mamzerim. How many of you have come across the term mamzer? Well, that's a goodly number, considering how obscure it is, but it isn't.
In Yiddish, it's not obscure.
In Yiddish, it's an epithet. A mamzer is a child conceived in a forbidden union. In the case I put you, adultery, because the wife was still married when she married the second person. And the Bible forbids a mamzer from entering the congregation of God, and the rabbis forbade a mamzer from marrying anyone but another mamzer down to the 10th generation. It was a serious disability, and the rabbis did everything they could to prevent it from occurring. They were not always successful. And in this case, because annulments of writs of divorce wreaked such havoc when the wife was not present, the rabbis established a fix for the regular legal process or rule because it had become harmful in practice. And they invoked the concept of tikkun olam in declaring that you couldn't go to a Beit Din anymore to get a divorce that you had decreed. In those days, only men could. Women could get divorces, but it's complicated in senior after class. But most men initiated divorce. And that's a fix or repair on the corpus of Jewish life. And the word olam doesn't refer to the whole world. That's obviously not a fix on the whole world, but to the whole community or the Jewish world. And there's one other instance that I'll refer you to, and I'll just mention it once. Many of you know, Hillel's famous prose bowl, when he just took the life out of the Torah's command that in the Jubilee year, all debts had to be forgiven. The practical consequence of that rule was that no poor Jew could get a loan in the year or so preceding the Jubilee. To fix that, Hillel set up a system in which you could go to a rabbinic court, take your debts, give it to the court, and the court, which was not bound by this rule, it only applies to people, could collect it. So he, in effect, repaired or fixed the imperfect rule that had come down, that the rabbis had much earlier established. Now, Tikkun Olam also appears in a few midrashim, rabbinic elaborations on the biblical text. As used there, the term refers to repairs or fixes to the physical world to make it physically viable. And that is why God created the firmament between the upper waters and the lower waters, because unless that were there could be no dry land. And on the second day, that's what God accomplished. And similarly, he created rain, without which life would not be possible. These are characterized as tikkun olam in the Midrashim. This whole term is very infrequent in the texts, I should tell you, and I'm therefore doubly indebted to the people I mentioned. Tikkun olam also appears, and this most strikingly, in the Aleinu prayer, which may be older even than the Mishnah. Some of you probably know it. Aleinu mishabeach lakol and adon hakol. And for some, the Aleinu prayer is a favorite because it signals that the service is about to end. But don't let that fool you. Aleinu is a profound expression of the Jewish spirit. It announces that we are obliged to praise God, the master of all, and goes on to proclaim our hope that we may soon see God's mighty splendor, litakein olam b'malchut shaddai. That is, that means perfecting the world through the sovereignty of the Almighty. And I'm sure you recognize that that is an element of the hope for the Messianic era that appears at the end of the Aleinu. Even more far-reaching than the liturgical use of the term tikkun olam is its significance in the work of Isaac Luria, the great 16th century Safed Kabbalist. Now, those of you who know me will be shocked to discover that I would cite a Kabbalist for anything. But in this case, I think it's entirely appropriate that I do. He invoked tikkun olam to describe the process of our gathering the sparks loosed when God created the world and when the vessels carrying the light, God's light, carrying the divine light, shattered, introducing evil into the world. And Luria saw this tragedy as a cosmological disruption involving God himself that needs to be repaired. And Jews can do that, he imagined, by study, by prayer, and by performing mitzvot, or commandments, with the proper intention and state of mind, which the Kabbalists insisted upon. Underlying these applications of the term tikkun olam are deep currents that flow through the whole of our religious experience. Our world is imperfect, even though it was created by God, but we do not simply sit by and watch these imperfections with equanimity. As my colleagues pointed out, to the contrary, we feel obliged to correct them when and how we can. And sometimes by study, often through gemilut chasadim, by acts of loving kindness, sometimes by joining with others to prevent, repair, and ameliorate the harms that we see. Not every act of compassion, not every performance of a mitzvah, not every discovery merits the term tikkun olam. Rather, properly used, the term refers to major initiatives that aspire to effect change that is analogous to those that Luria and the composers of Aleinu had in mind when they excited our hope for a better future. I see connections between the phenomena embraced with the term tikkun olam and the new medical and biological initiative that you will learn about this evening. Imaginative, highly trained, and gifted scientists in several fields are setting out to learn precisely how events in early life lead to suffering and early death in adulthood, and with that knowledge, to enrich the lives of generations to come. If the effort succeeds, it will represent another step for the benefit of humankind, not all at once, the way the Aleinu conceived, perhaps, of God's repair of the world, but nevertheless, enabling improvements in the lives of many over the generations. A project of this magnitude with the hoped-for benefits to mankind is a form of tikkun olam. And I welcome you, therefore, to this event, and I wait eagerly to hear what our speakers have to say, because from what I know about what they're doing, it really is an exciting example of tikkun olam.